My parents secretly deceived me for years, then tried to cut me out of the will, but I fought back in a way they never expected. I'm a 34-year-old man living in Austin, Texas, and I work as an architect. I've been out of touch with my family for years, not completely no contact, but enough that I could go months, sometimes a full year without hearing from them. It wasn't always like this. Things started falling apart in my 20s after something that was supposed to be a small favor turned into a massive financial weight I had to carry. At the time, my younger brother wanted to open a restaurant. He had no real experience running a business, but he talked big and convinced our parents it was his dream. They believed in him, and they asked me to co-sign the business loan. They said it was just a formality, that he had investors lined up, a location picked out, and a solid plan. They also said they'd step in if anything went wrong. I hesitated, but they pressed hard, and I eventually agreed. Less than a year after it opened, the restaurant crashed. My brother stopped paying the loan, vanished from any sort of financial responsibility, and moved on like nothing happened. He didn't just fail, he left the mess behind without looking back. The bank didn't care whose dream it was. My name was on the paperwork, and I was the one they came after. I spent the next few years working 2 jobs. I skipped vacations, delayed buying a house, and burned through my savings just trying to stay above water. I brought it up with my parents more than once, how I had been lied to and how unfair it was that I was the one cleaning up. They didn't argue the facts, but every time I tried to hold them accountable, they told me to be the bigger person, that family means sacrifice, that I was making things harder than they needed to be. Eventually, I stopped trying. I didn't go no contact, but I kept my distance. I showed up for weddings, holidays, and the occasional birthday dinner, but I never got too comfortable. I stopped sharing anything personal and focused on rebuilding my own life. I got my license back in good standing, started picking up better contracts at work, and learned not to expect fairness from people who protected the wrong person. A few months ago, my mother reached out. She said my father's health was declining. She didn't give specifics, but she talked about how short life is and how we should try to make things right while we still can. She asked me to come to dinner, not a special event, just dinner, like old times, every Sunday if I was open to it. I didn't say yes right away. I wasn't sure what making peace meant to them, but after some thinking, I figured I'd at least go once. Maybe things had changed, maybe they hadn't. Either way, I'd find out on my own terms. The first dinner was fine. I hadn't seen my brother in years, and he acted like nothing had ever happened. No apology, no mention of the loan, just stories about his job, his wife, and what shows he was watching. I kept quiet. I didn't bring up the past, I just observed. I noticed things. My childhood room wasn't my room anymore. It had been cleared out and converted into what looked like a craft room or storage space. Nothing of mine remained, not the bookshelf, not the drawings I had framed, not even the old trophies. I asked once, casually, and my mother just said, we needed the space. My sister-in-law made a comment during dinner that stuck with me. She laughed and said something about how I'd finally stopped holding a grudge. I didn't respond, I just smiled and kept eating. A few days after that, my father asked me for a favor. He said he was trying to get all the estate documents in order and wanted help organizing them. I agreed, not because I had high hopes, but because I was curious if this was their attempt to fix things. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. He handed me a folder with copies of their will, property paperwork, and insurance information. I noticed something immediately. My name wasn't on any of it. 5 years earlier, they had updated the documents. Everything, including the house I had helped renovate and pay for when I was younger, had been left entirely to my brother. I didn't react right away. I asked about it. My mother said it was just a placeholder, that since I had cut ties, they assumed I didn't want anything. She said it as if it were a simple mistake, as if I had made the choice to walk away, and not that they had pushed me out over and over again. That was when I started paying closer attention. I didn't tell them what I was thinking. I didn't start a fight, but I started digging. I wanted to know how deep it went, how long they had been rewriting the truth, how much they had taken. I had already spent years carrying a debt that wasn't mine. I needed to find out if there was more they hadn't told me, and I had no idea just how much there was. After seeing my name erased from the family will, and hearing my mother explain it away like it was a harmless placeholder, I knew something didn't sit right. I've been cautious with my life ever since the fallout from co-signing that restaurant loan, so I reached out to a lawyer I'd worked with before, a no-nonsense guy who handles business contracts for my firm. I told him I needed a quiet investigation into any past financial activity tied to my identity, especially during the years I had minimal contact with my family. We started with basic records, Within 2 weeks, he found something that didn't make sense. A joint bank account had been opened using my social security number. I had no memory of opening it. Worse, the secondary name on the account wasn't mine. It had been scrubbed, but a subpoena to the bank would reveal the rest. That account had been flagged by the IRS in connection with unpaid taxes from the restaurant. I thought the debt had been cleared long ago after I paid what the bank demanded. It turns out there was more hiding beneath the surface. Instead of reacting, I started gathering everything. Any old letters, bank notices, account statements. I scanned them all. I kept a timeline with notes, dates, and screenshots. I didn't want to tip anyone off. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I reached out to the accountant I'd used during those years I was paying off the debt. He still had records. He pulled up my file and found something I hadn't seen before, a tax lien filed 2 years ago, tied to a second wave of unpaid business expenses. I never got a notice, and that explained why my application for a business line of credit had quietly been denied last year. It wasn't about my income or work history. It was about something I didn't even know had been placed in my name. I froze my credit that night, set up alerts, changed every password I could think of, deleted accounts I no longer used, and activated two-step authentication across everything. I bought an external drive and backed up all evidence offline. The next Sunday, I went back to my parents' house. I acted like everything was fine, like I hadn't seen the will, like I didn't know about the joint account. My brother was already there, lounging in the living room. My father greeted me at the door with a smile and asked about work. My mother was already in the kitchen, setting the table. At dinner, my brother started talking about how grateful he was to our parents. He said they had helped him through hard times, completely ignoring the financial and legal mess he left me with. He mentioned that they bought him a new truck. His exact words were, "They said I deserved it for sticking close to the family." He said it with pride, not knowing I had been left cleaning up his wreckage for years. Then his wife joined in. She laughed and made a remark about how some people are always in the will and some people just drop off the map. It wasn't a joke, it was a shot, and she looked directly at me when she said it. Later, while everyone was distracted by dessert, I walked down the hallway and slipped into what used to be my brother's room. It had been turned into a small home office, nothing extravagant, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and some drawers. I opened the drawers carefully, making sure to return everything exactly how I found it. Inside, I found folders neatly labeled, one for the house, one for insurance, another said power of attorney. I flipped through them. Every single document had been updated. Every one of them left out my name, no mention of me as a CO owner, beneficiary, or even emergency contact. Instead, all the boxes were checked with my brother's name and, in some places, his wife's. I took photos of everything, quietly returned each folder, shut the drawers, and stepped out like I had been looking for the bathroom. When I got back home, I sent everything to my lawyer. He called me that same night and asked if I was ready to move forward legally. He told me this wasn't just about the will or the truck. These documents, combined with the forged accounts, pointed to long-term identity misuse, possibly even criminal-level fraud. A day later, the phone calls started. Unfamiliar numbers, one after another. I ignored them. One left a voicemail saying I owed over $30,000 in business taxes. I recorded it, saved it, and forwarded it to my lawyer. I changed my number that same evening, deactivated accounts I hadn't touched in years, old email addresses, subscription services, anything that could be tied to a forgotten login. Then I paid a forensic accountant to trace all financial activity linked to my social security number over the past 10 years. I wanted a full audit. If they had done this much in plain sight, I could only imagine what was hidden deeper. I didn't confront anyone, no phone calls, no angry emails. I wasn't going to give them a warning. The plan now was simple: trace everything, build the case, and find out who else had their hands on my life behind my back. The forensic accountant finished the first deep audit and delivered a report that covered 8 years of activity tied to my name. According to the findings, 3 credit cards had been opened without my consent. Each one had been registered at my parents' old address. All 3 had been used for basic household purchases, groceries, utility bills, even a few furniture payments. None of them were massive in isolation, but they had all been maxed out and sent into collections. Then came the 4th card. That one was different. It had a higher limit and had been opened just 2 years ago. A large transaction stood out immediately, a $9,000 down payment made to an auto dealership. The card was maxed out shortly afterward and shut down. The date of the purchase matched exactly with the day my brother had posted a picture of his new truck online, the same truck he'd proudly said was a gift for being the one who stayed close to the family. I froze my credit again, even though I'd already done it once. This time, I added identity theft alerts through all 3 major credit bureaus and signed up for full monitoring. I gave the forensic report to my lawyer, and he contacted the credit card companies directly. One company responded first. They provided the driver's license image that had been submitted for account verification. It had my name and information, but the photo wasn't mine. It was a grainy copy of someone else entirely. That's when my lawyer told me we had enough to proceed with a civil lawsuit. He said if more evidence came to light, it could lead to criminal charges for identity theft and fraud. I wasn't ready to go public yet. I didn't want this to become a legal ambush, without trying one more time to hear it directly from the people who did it. I asked my father to meet me for coffee. I told him I wanted to continue helping with the estate planning paperwork, and he agreed. We sat at a quiet cafe, and I handed him a printed list of the 4 credit cards along with the IRS lien. He stared at it without saying much. When he finally spoke, he said everything had happened during a confusing time, and that they thought I had moved on and wanted distance. He admitted the bills were in my name and said they were paid using family funds, ignoring that I never agreed to any of it. When I asked about the truck and the driver's license, he looked out the window and said that sometimes things get mixed up when people are just trying to help each other. He never admitted anything clearly, just vague phrases and redirection. That was enough for me. The next morning I met with my lawyer and signed off on sending a cease and desist letter to both my parents and my brother. The letter demanded an immediate stop to all use of my personal information, account access, and identity across any platform. A copy was sent by mail, email, and served in person. A few days later, a mutual friend reached out, saying my mother had contacted her through a landline to ask if she could speak with me just one last time. I told her to relay a message. I wasn't open to any more indirect communication. If they had something to say, they could respond through legal channels. My brother didn't wait for that. He sent an email to an old work contact we both shared, asking them to forward a message to me. He called me dramatic, said I was blowing things out of proportion, that lawyers weren't necessary for family disagreements. He wrote that I was always the one to hold a grudge, and joked that I must have been bored at work if I had time for this level of effort. I didn't respond. I didn't even read it twice. I archived it and forwarded a copy to my lawyer. After that, I turned my focus to fixing what I could. I activated identity protection services with real-time alerts. I requested all account statements from the companies involved. I started submitting fraud reports one by one. Every debt, every collection, every login attempt I didn't recognize. Each one became a new case number. Some banks were cooperative, some pushed back. I filed official disputes and began creating a digital folder of everything: PDFs, transcripts, emails, voicemails. I hired a second firm that specializes in digital forensics and had them trace every instance of my data being accessed over the past 10 years. If any online forms had been submitted using my name or ID, I wanted records with every step. The scope of what they'd done became harder to ignore. This wasn't one mistake. It wasn't a single account. It was layered, calculated, and sustained. Each part was just small enough to pass unnoticed, but together, they told a much larger story. A story that had stolen not just my credit, but years of opportunity, access, and trust. The time for quiet watching was coming to an end. I had let it go once. I wasn't going to let it happen again, not now that I knew just how deep it went. A week after the cease and desist letters were delivered, my lawyer forwarded me another notice, this time from a collections agency I hadn't dealt with before. The letter claimed I had an unpaid balance on a credit card I'd never opened. This one wasn't tied to household expenses or a truck. The charges listed were software subscriptions, cloud storage, and vendor management tools, all things I'd never personally used but recognized from business contexts. My lawyer pulled credit reports again, and we traced the 5th credit card back to an account linked to a business management software. It had been opened using my name and social security number, but the address used was my parents' old home, the same one my younger brother had taken over and now legally owned. The billing address had been updated to that property shortly after the software account was activated. We reached out to the software provider with the correct legal documentation. They granted us metadata logs. Those logs showed my brother's name and personal email, added as administrative users. He wasn't listed as the account owner, but he had been managing payments, permissions, and communications for nearly 2 years. Screenshots were taken of everything: timestamp changes, login IPs, payment histories. I gathered everything: letters, logs, copies of emails, notarized statements from the collections notices, and voicemail recordings. I backed it all up onto an encrypted drive and stored it with a trusted friend who works in cybersecurity. I didn't want to rely on cloud backups for evidence this sensitive. Then came the calls, not from lawyers or creditors this time. Distant family, people I hadn't heard from in years, started reaching out through texts and voicemail. Some were passive-aggressive, others were outright angry. One message said I was trying to humiliate the family over a few mix-ups. Another accused me of weaponizing lawyers over misunderstandings. I hadn't told anyone in the extended family about what was happening. That's when I knew someone else had. A cousin I used to be close with messaged me privately. He said I needed to see something. He sent me screenshots from a group chat I had never been part of, a family group chat that had apparently existed for years, running through birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays, none of which I had been invited to. The screenshots were worse than I expected. My mother had been telling everyone I was unstable, difficult to talk to, and had cut off the family for no reason. She'd said I was impossible to please and constantly angry, and that I refused to return calls or show up for family functions. None of that was true. I had kept my distance, but I'd never blocked anyone. I just stopped initiating contact. The story they had told was completely flipped. There was more. My younger brother had been praised constantly as the one who always stayed loyal, the reliable one, and even the rightful heir to family assets. One message mentioned he had taken over their vacation property and deserved it after years of staying close and helping out. Another message said I had formally withdrawn any interest in the family estate. That line stopped me. I asked my lawyer to dig into property records related to the vacation home through a private contact in real estate. We traced the transfer documents. A legal disclaimer had been filed under my name, a document stating that I had no interest in claiming the property and had forfeited any ownership rights. I never signed that. We found out who had handled the legal paperwork. The name was familiar, a family lawyer who had done basic contracts for my parents years ago. I called the office, pretending to be a potential buyer interested in purchasing a share of the property for investment purposes. I asked for a full document package to review, and they sent it over. Inside the file was a scanned form with my name, address, and a signature that wasn't mine. The handwriting was off, the loops were wrong, and the letters were inconsistent with how I write my last name. The signature had clearly been copied from an old document and reused. We sent the file to a handwriting expert and confirmed it was forged. That's when my legal team updated the civil case. We added forgery, property fraud, and intentional misrepresentation. Copies of every form, email, and supporting message were prepped for the official complaint. My lawyer also began organizing everything for potential criminal referral. We weren't going to wait for permission to escalate. Meanwhile, my brother's wife posted something vague online, just a black background with white text saying, "Family doesn't stab you in the back, not unless they were never real family to begin with." The post got supportive comments from relatives who had no clue what was really happening. I didn't respond, but I did take screenshots. Not long after, one of my aunts reached out privately. She said she always suspected something wasn't right and offered to give a statement if it ever came to that. She remembered conversations over the years where things didn't add up, but no one wanted to speak up against the rest of the family. At that point, I realized staying quiet had only helped them. Every lie they told filled the silence I left behind. So, I began drafting a digital folder. Not a dramatic message, not a plea, just facts, legal documents, evidence logs, dates, and screenshots, written in clear language for anyone who wanted to understand what was really going on. Once forgery was proven and witnesses were lining up, I decided this was no longer just about defense. It was time to go on offense. After finalizing the evidence with my lawyer, we sent out a formal notice of intent to sue. The letter named my parents and my brother as respondents for identity theft, forgery, property fraud, and financial deception. It detailed each infraction: 5 unauthorized credit cards, falsified tax documents, forged signatures, and stolen property rights. Every claim was backed with documents, timestamps, and statements. We chose a specific day to serve the papers, my father's birthday. It wasn't about being cruel, it was about ensuring everyone would be there. That way, there'd be no denying it or brushing it off as a miscommunication. By mid-afternoon, the server delivered 3 packets, one to my parents, one to my brother, and one for the family lawyer who had filed the fraudulent vacation home documents. By that evening, my inbox and phone were full. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages from cousins, uncles, even people I hadn't spoken to since high school. Some asked what was going on, others were furious, saying I was trying to tear the family apart. A few were passive, hoping I'd find a way to forgive. Clearly, word had gotten out, but not the truth. So, I sent out the folder I'd been preparing, a digital link with a password. Inside was a timeline, scanned documents, forensic reports, screenshots from the group chat, property filings with forged signatures, and comparison overlays from the handwriting expert. Everything had dates, context, and legal references. There was no emotional language, no rants, just data. Within hours, the group chat broke down. Messages started leaking. A few relatives quietly messaged me and apologized for believing what they'd been told. Others doubled down, saying I was ruining our family name. One cousin even accused me of turning into the type of person who sues their own parents for attention. That night, my father left a voicemail. He said the lawsuit was a disgraceful display and something we should have handled like men, face to face. He didn't deny anything in the call. He didn't mention the fraud, just complained about the optics and called it a family issue, not a courtroom one. I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. It became part of the documentation, showing lack of remorse. The next day, a cousin I hadn't seen in over a decade knocked on my door. She handed me an envelope and said, "This is from your mother." Inside was a handwritten letter. It said that families make mistakes and begged me to please stop this before it's too late. I didn't open the letter beyond that. I told my cousin to let her know I wasn't accepting indirect messages anymore. I'd made my boundaries clear, and I wasn't walking them back. That same evening, my brother posted on his social media a vague caption paired with a picture of him and our parents smiling at a barbecue. The text read, "It's sad when family turns against you for no reason. Some people live to create chaos." The post was flooded with likes and supportive comments from people who had no idea what was really happening. Not a single mention of the lawsuit, not one word about stolen identity or forged documents. A few people from college messaged me. Others from an old job reached out. They'd seen the post or heard bits and pieces from mutual friends. I sent each of them the same response, a simple summary file with facts, legal references, and court filings. Nothing emotional, just clean information that quieted the speculation. My workplace also got wind of it. My manager pulled me in for a meeting. I brought a copy of the legal packet and a written summary of what had happened. After reading through it, they told me I had the firm's full support and that my role would not be affected. They also put in protocols to ensure no press or third parties would get access to any internal information to keep the process from taking over my daily life. I gave full power of attorney to my lawyer. He would handle all filings, communications, and case updates. I would check in weekly, but the day-to-day would run without me. I couldn't build my future while being dragged through every detail of the past. A few weeks later, the court accepted the case. The judge reviewed the evidence and approved it for full trial. Subpoenas were issued for archived emails, property transaction logs, and security footage from the notary office where the deed transfer was claimed to have taken place. Bank logs were requested to trace the payments made on the forged accounts. That's when things started to unravel. The family narrative that had been held together by years of silence and half-truths began falling apart. The documents didn't match the stories. The signatures didn't match the ID. The bank logs didn't match the names. The lies they had used to build their version of reality started to collapse under legal scrutiny. What they called family drama was being unmasked as something else entirely. And I knew that the next step wasn't just a legal battle. It was a reckoning between who they pretended to be and what they'd actually done. A few weeks before the trial date, the court issued a mandatory mediation order. It was the last chance for both sides to reach a resolution before things went to open litigation. My lawyer advised me to attend, not for reconciliation, but to observe their strategy and lock in our own pretrial approach. We met at a neutral office downtown. A mediator was assigned, and private rooms were prepared on both sides. My parents arrived with a new attorney, someone who came from a reputation management background. His tone was polished but aggressive. He opened the session by accusing me of attacking the family out of spite and dragging old wounds into public view for no reason. He claimed I was misinterpreting harmless paperwork and had taken things too far. My brother sat next to him, silent at first, until he finally chimed in, saying that everything was misunderstood and that I was making a big deal over what he described as shared resources. My lawyer responded with a prepared slideshow. Each slide contained digital records, IP logs tied to my brother's devices, banking timestamps showing payments and account setups traced to their address, and scanned notarized deeds showing inconsistencies with official stamps. The last slide compared my real signature with the one used on the property disclaimer. The differences were clear, even without a handwriting expert. Their lawyer asked for a break halfway through. During the pause, while walking past the vending machines, I overheard my father talking in a lowered voice. He was blaming my mother for the entire mess, saying, "This would have never gotten this far if she hadn't kept pushing paperwork around without asking anyone." I didn't say a word. I just walked back into our room and documented what I heard. The mediator wrapped up the session by stating on record that reconciliation was not possible. The report was formally submitted to the court with a recommendation to proceed to full trial without further delay. As the session ended and we stepped into the hallway, my brother tried to stop me. He reached out and began to say something about clearing the air. I didn't respond. I kept walking. I alerted my legal team immediately. From that point forward, all communication would stay documented and through attorneys only. Later that evening, a cousin messaged me again. She sent a new batch of screenshots from the family chat. My mother had posted a lengthy message accusing me of always needing to outshine my brother and being addicted to attention and drama. Several family members responded with reactions and comments in agreement. I saved the screenshots. The language she used would later help support the emotional impact portion of the case. At my lawyer's suggestion, I began writing out a detailed timeline of events from my past. Every time I had been excluded, manipulated, or dismissed, every instance of gaslighting. I included details from my teenage years, family investments I contributed to, renovation work I helped complete, and how I was always labeled the one who never came through, even when I had. Around that time, a small regional blog that focuses on family-related fraud and identity theft reached out to my legal team. They asked for an interview or statement. I declined a personal interview but allowed my lawyer to provide a factual, neutral summary with no speculation. It was published the next day with the headline, "Architect's Identity Hijacked by Own Family, Legal Case Exposes Hidden Abuse." That article made rounds quietly but steadily. Within days, my brother's employer placed him on administrative leave. No announcement was made, but someone forwarded me a copy of the internal memo citing reputational concerns related to ongoing legal proceedings. It wasn't a firing, but it was a signal. Out of nowhere, a childhood friend I hadn't heard from in years reached out. He said he had followed the story and that, looking back, he realized how often the family had made me out to be difficult. He apologized for believing it and offered to write a statement if it would help. I accepted and connected him with my lawyer. 2 former neighbors contacted me as well. They had been present during major renovations at the family home when I was in my early 20s, repairs I'd paid for and helped coordinate. They remembered me showing up every weekend with materials and contractors. Their statements directly contradicted the version my parents had submitted earlier, where they claimed I had never contributed financially or physically to the property. While everything unfolded, I buried myself in work. I took on a new project designing transitional housing for youth aging out of the foster care system. The project wasn't just a distraction, it was something that reminded me of the value of structure, design, and building things that last. As the trial neared, more reporters began requesting interviews. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years resurfaced, each with a version of the same question: how did this happen? But I wasn't in this to explain anymore. I had proof, witnesses, statements, records, and a legal team prepared to go the full distance. I wasn't just defending myself. I was putting a stop to something they thought they could get away with forever. I was setting a boundary where none had existed before, and this time, the silence wouldn't be used against me. 60 days, that's what the court gave us after finalizing the trial date. 60 days to lock in our witness list, organize every document, and submit the final forensic reports. My legal team expanded the case files. Over the last few months, we had collected hundreds of pieces of evidence, emails, bank statements, expert reports, screenshots, and signed affidavits. But something unexpected landed in our lap just as we began preparing our final submission. A retired financial advisor reached out through my attorney's office. He had worked with my parents years ago, back when the original estate plan was first drafted. He said he still had copies of the older trust documents in his archive, and one file in particular stood out. It was a notarized affidavit from my father, signed over a decade ago, stating that the family's vacation property would be jointly owned by both sons, myself and my brother. We reviewed the document. It had clear notary stamps, dated signatures, and was professionally prepared. It directly contradicted the current deed, which now had my brother listed as the sole legal owner. That single document triggered a court motion. My lawyer filed it immediately, and the judge approved a temporary freeze on the property. That meant no selling, no transferring, no restructuring until the case was resolved. My brother's lawyer tried to challenge the case again. This time, they argued that the statute of limitations had expired and that any documents older than 5 years were irrelevant. The judge disagreed. The court ruled that, due to the ongoing nature and concealed fraud behind the identity theft and financial harm, the claims remained valid under the law. The motion to dismiss was denied. Depositions began shortly after. During my mother's testimony, she admitted under oath that she knew several of the credit cards were in my name. She said she thought it wasn't a big deal because the money had been used for household needs. The court transcript recorded her exact phrasing. My lawyer flagged it. That single statement turned what they called a misunderstanding into something they knowingly allowed. In a follow-up hearing, the judge directly addressed both of my parents. He pointed out the inconsistencies between their previous financial records and their current statements. Tax filings, banking documents, and estate records didn't align with what they'd told the court. The judge issued a warning, making it clear that if further discrepancies were uncovered, sanctions would follow. The pressure increased when the notary who supposedly witnessed my signature on the vacation home deed was subpoenaed. She appeared via video conference and confirmed that she never met me. She said she had notarized a stack of papers given to her by my father, and that my signature was already on them when she saw them. That detail, combined with expert analysis, proved the signature had been photocopied. It was a forged document, plain and simple. This revelation caused a shift. The district attorney requested access to the court files. What began as a civil case was now being reviewed for criminal charges, fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Then another message came in. My attorney received an anonymous email from someone claiming to be a former employee of my brother's failed restaurant. The message said my name had been used to open vendor accounts, order supplies, and negotiate with distributors. Attached to the email was a photo of a vendor application. The name on it was mine, but the signature wasn't. The handwriting was inconsistent and sloppy, nothing like my real signature. We forwarded it to the court and added it to the growing list of identity misuse. After the court filings became public record, the ripple effect began. Some of the relatives who had previously backed my parents changed their stance. A few reached out quietly, offering statements or copies of old messages that contradicted what my family had been claiming for years. One cousin came forward with something even more direct. He said that years ago his mother had admitted I was removed from the will because I was too independent and wouldn't fall in line like the younger one. That admission confirmed what I had long suspected. This wasn't just about fraud, it was about control, about punishing me for building a life outside of their expectations. With each new piece of evidence, the story they had crafted began to collapse. Their version of events, where I had walked away, refused help, and turned bitter, was breaking apart under facts and sworn testimony. The media picked up pieces of the story as documents surfaced online. What once looked like a private family matter was now a full-blown legal case with public interest and potential criminal charges. Reporters asked questions, local blogs ran summaries, and behind the scenes, the state began reviewing the case more closely. For the first time since all of this began, there was no spinning it. The paper trail was clear, the lies had been caught, the damage had been done, and it could no longer be ignored or explained away. Accountability wasn't just possible now, it was coming. The court issued a protective injunction that barred my parents and brother from making any changes to financial or property assets until the case was resolved. That meant no selling, no refinancing, no restructuring accounts. The vacation property was locked under the freeze order, and my lawyer filed for monitoring of any attempted movement across related bank accounts. Within days of the injunction, my brother was served with an official notice informing him that a criminal investigation had been opened. The charges under review included identity theft, document forgery, and financial fraud. Less than 48 hours after receiving the notice, he attempted to contact me through a mutual acquaintance. The message was a private offer to settle everything quietly in exchange for dropping the criminal part of the case. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, who immediately submitted it to the court. The judge logged it as a potential act of witness tampering and warned the opposing counsel that any further indirect contact attempts would be taken seriously. That record was added to the case timeline as evidence of desperation and intent to avoid formal accountability. The local media picked up the story next. The headline read, "Man accuses family of years-long identity theft in explosive civil suit." A follow-up article highlighted the impact, how years of silent financial sabotage had destroyed credit, delayed property ownership, and cost thousands in legal fees. It spread fast, and soon my workplace received inquiries from reporters. My firm responded with a short internal memo and a public statement. They confirmed their full support and reminded all staff that internal discussion about the matter was not permitted. HR also confirmed that I would be protected from press contact during work hours and offered legal assistance if outside pressure escalated. Meanwhile, the retired financial advisor who had helped draft the original estate documents submitted a signed deposition. In it, he confirmed that I had provided funds toward the down payment of the vacation home. His records included a copy of a personal check from over a decade ago, addressed to the same title company that handled the original property purchase. That check directly contradicted the current claim that I had no financial involvement. In response, the court placed a lien on the vacation property pending full reassessment of ownership. My brother tried to fight back publicly. He recorded a video, posted it across multiple platforms, and portrayed himself as the scapegoat. He claimed the lawsuit was built on bitterness and painted a picture of being misunderstood and targeted. But it didn't work for long. Online commenters began digging. Old records were posted. Articles surfaced about his failed restaurant, unpaid debts, and past disputes with former vendors. His attempt to shift public sympathy only added fuel to the truth already catching fire. A new witness came forward next. A former landlord contacted my legal team with documents showing that a lease had been signed using my identity years ago, complete with fake employment information and forged pay stubs. The address was one my brother had used while running his short-lived business. The landlord had kept the lease for tax records and was willing to testify that I had never lived there and had never applied for the unit myself. The court accepted the new witness, and the lease agreement was added to the fraud timeline. The case now covered almost 10 years of stolen identity, misused credit, and forged documentation, all pointing back to the same individuals, supported by new audit trails. Then my father was hospitalized for a cardiac issue. Several family members reached out through third parties, urging me to drop the case out of compassion and to remember what family means. I declined to respond. I passed all contact attempts to my attorney. Nothing had changed. His health didn't erase what had been done, and it didn't restore what had been taken. The judge reviewed the pattern of interference, new testimony, and continued manipulation. Citing urgency and the need to prevent further tampering, the court fast-tracked the trial date. Discovery deadlines were shortened, and priority was given to pull-in communications between my brother and his legal representation, including attempts to contact witnesses. To strengthen the emotional damages claim, my lawyer submitted a psychological evaluation report prepared by a licensed therapist. The report detailed the long-term effects of gaslighting, emotional exclusion, and repeated betrayal. It outlined the mental toll of having one's financial identity slowly erased while being painted as the family problem. The case now officially listed identity theft, property fraud, emotional abuse, and reputational harm. Each count was backed with records, testimony, and expert validation. There was no longer any version of events that could protect them, not legally, not socially, and not within the extended family, who now saw through the years of falsehoods. As the trial approached, I focused on preparation. Everything had shifted. I wasn't entering the courtroom just to win damages. I was walking in to take back my name, my credit, my story, every piece of myself they had tried to rewrite. The trial opened with my legal team presenting a timeline that covered nearly a decade of evidence. The courtroom projector showed a series of slides, one after another, linking dates, forged signatures, duplicate financial records, and sworn statements. There were notarized documents, screenshots of altered emails, IP logs, bank statements, and witness reports. Every detail had a timestamp. Every claim had a paper trail. The room was silent. My brother was called to the stand first. He started by insisting that it was all a misunderstanding, that no harm was meant, and everything had been done during a difficult time. But under cross-examination, when asked directly how my name ended up on business leases, vendor accounts, and credit applications, he paused. Then he said, "It was easier to use his information. He wasn't using it." The words hit like a hammer. No denial, no excuses, just admission. When my mother testified, she tried to take the emotional route. She claimed she had done what she had to for her younger son, that families make sacrifices, that it had been about survival, not harm. The judge cut her off mid-sentence. He reminded her firmly that helping one child by defrauding another wasn't sacrifice, it was criminal facilitation. Her face fell. She said nothing else for the remainder of her testimony. The notary who had allegedly witnessed my signature on the vacation home deed gave her testimony next. She confirmed that she'd notarized the documents at my father's request but had never met me. She admitted she didn't ask questions when presented with pre-signed forms and now regretted it. That sealed it. The judge ruled the deed void, citing confirmed forgery. The vacation property was split according to the original estate affidavit. My brother was ordered to pay back rent and use penalties dating back to when the property was falsely transferred into his name. Shortly after, my legal team submitted verified letters from multiple credit bureaus. Based on the court's findings, the fraudulent accounts were flagged and removed from my record. My credit score was restored, all associated debt was erased, and the agencies issued written apologies for the years of damage. That same day, the district attorney's office announced that criminal charges were officially being filed against my brother for identity theft, financial fraud, and falsifying legal documents. Both of my parents were placed under investigation for conspiracy and financial misconduct. A separate criminal review would proceed parallel to the civil outcome. The judge delivered his ruling. I was awarded $180,000 in damages. That included coverage for emotional harm, lost opportunities, legal expenses, and career setbacks caused by the credit destruction and false reputation that followed. Before closing, the judge addressed the room. He said that family loyalty does not excuse betrayal, and that protecting someone at another's expense isn't love, it's abuse hiding behind tradition. When the session ended, I handed my lawyer a final list. Every family member who had testified against me, enabled the fraud, or knowingly passed along misinformation was to be removed from my life. Contact would not be restored, not now, not later. My lawyer sent out a notice stating that any attempts to reach me would be treated as harassment and forwarded to legal channels. Within a week of the verdict, I listed my share of the vacation home and sold it. I donated part of the proceeds to an organization that supports identity theft survivors. They help people rebuild from scratch, financially and emotionally, and it felt right to support something that had nearly crushed me. My brother's employer didn't wait long. His termination was confirmed less than 10 days after the verdict. Word spread fast through his industry, and several partnerships he had relied on were quietly pulled. My parents, unable to cover the mounting fines, back rent, and legal fees, listed their house for sale. It went on the market under urgency. The case was covered again by local outlets. One headline read, "Architect Fights Back, Wins Landmark Family Fraud Case." The story spread to financial blogs, consumer rights forums, and legal newsletters as an example of long-term fraud hidden behind family dynamics. After everything was finalized, I booked a solo trip abroad. No plans, no phone, no contact, just space. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I wanted to breathe air that wasn't tied to paperwork, courtrooms, or headlines. When it was done, when I returned home and saw the house I built for myself untouched by their hands, I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel triumph, just clarity. People talk a lot about forgiveness, like it's the only finish line that matters. But forgiveness is a gift, not a duty, and it's not owed when someone keeps stealing your name every time you try to move on. They asked me to forgive and forget. I chose something else. I chose to remember everything and make sure it never happened again.